Some consider it one of the best hour-long Christmas episodes in TV history. But behind the scenes erupted a bitter feud, one that ended up playing out in public and one that may have cost one writer his job. This is the fascinating behind-the-scenes story of The West Wing's 10th episode, a heart-rending entry based on a tragic real-life story. The only question was, whose story was it? It's in Excelsis Deo, next on Best Eps. It's the summer of 1999, and Aaron Sorkin is exhausted. He's already spent a year and a half writing and producing, along with director Thomas Schlamme, Sports Night, and has just completed work on the first 9 episodes of The West Wing. But as the writers discussed the show's upcoming holiday-themed episode, Sorkin's well had run dry. That's when West Wing staffer and playwright Rick Cleveland related a story about his own experiences with his father, a Korean War veteran who had a falling out with his family and ended up as an alcoholic on the streets. Sorkin liked the premise enough to send Cleveland off to write the script for what was then called A White House Christmas, but would eventually become In Excelsis Deo. The resulting episode is a magnificent hour of television, combining screwball comedy, romantic comedy, moral drama, and deep character analysis. And of course, all those feel-good holiday vibes shared by TV's best Christmas episodes. Directed by Alex Graves, who only had a handful of credits when Schlamme hired him on to direct, it's a classic West Wing opener as Toby, Sam, CJ, and what's-her-name talk about Christmas plans, the upcoming of the new millennium, and CJ's Secret Service codename, Flamingo. But the meat of the teaser is also the meat of this episode, as Toby is told that the DC police want to talk to him urgently. Though there are a half-dozen different stories in this episode, it's Toby's plot that anchors In Excelsis Deo. A police officer, played by the late Lance Reddick, R.I.P., explains to Toby that a homeless man had Toby's business card in his pocket. By the way, the uncredited man playing that deceased vet on the bench is a local actor, Ralph Denton, himself a veteran of the Korean War. "It was eerie to see myself buried at Arlington on film," Denton told the Baltimore Sun in 2004, "even though I will be someday." And when Denton died in 2018, he was. Anyway, Toby realizes the dead man is wearing a coat he donated to Goodwill. The card must have been in its pocket. That seems to be the end of the confusion, until Toby points out that the man's service tattoo means that the VA should be notified. And that should be the end of the story. But something gnaws at Toby, and he uses his position in the White House to give the late Lance Corporal Walter Huffnagel a military funeral with full honors at Arlington National Cemetery. The wonderful thing about this episode, however, is that rather than finding a cemetery and having a double for Arlington and LA, producers were able to secure shooting time at the real Arlington in DC. According to executive producer John Wells, some folks at the Pentagon read the script and were so touched, they not only allowed filming there, but supplied the Marines for the funeral. After filming at Arlington, production then moved to a nearby underpass, as Toby tries to find the veteran's mentally challenged brother. The on-location filming of this scene gives an incredible verisimilitude to the episode, and it helps send home the theme, the juxtaposition. The idea of the White House being in the midst of celebrating a birth, Jesus, to Toby dealing with a death, the veteran. The idea that while DC, with its Capitol dome lit up in the background, is the seat of power and influence, just down the road, under a bridge, are those without any power or influence. And speaking of juxtaposition, this actor's name is Rainer Shine. Fun fact. According to Graves, with this scene, he was going for a style reminiscent of Frank Capra in movies like Meet John Doe and It's a Wonderful Life. In fact, save for the fires in the barrels, the scene is kinda almost in black and white, juxtaposing the explosion of color of the holiday decorations in Bartlett's White House. It's this scene in which Toby tries to artfully explain that he is a man of influence and can help the man's brother, that I think eventually won Schiff the Best Supporting Actor Emmy that year. His scenes with the wonderfully blunt Reddick, then later with the veteran running the kiosk, and the brother of the dead veteran are masterclasses in naturalistic acting. But according to Sorkin, they don't come easily for Schiff. Richard has some very private and intense work habits, Sorkin said, And by other accounts, he was perhaps the most mercurial and emotional of the show's cast, a trait that will indirectly light the fuse to the feud between Aaron Sorkin and the episode's credited co-writer, Rick Cleveland.
From all of us at the West Wing, happy holidays!
As I mentioned, there is a lot of humor in this episode to juxtapose the dire main story. The scene where the president drags some of his staff to a rare bookstore so he can do some Christmas shopping, and those between CJ and Danny about her finally saying yes to his requests for a date, are reminiscent of Tracy Hepburn. There's also a cute little subplot involving Josh buying Donna a rare book, a plot that was only added and filmed much later, when it became clear that the episode's runtime was going to be short. Graves had been a fan of Whitford and Janelle Maloney's chemistry before he signed on to the show, and it was his decision to have Bradley Whitford simply step out to spy on Donna as she reads the book's inscription. And this one moment essentially gave rise to the couple's entire romantic arc over the next 6.5 seasons. But for all its warm and fuzzy feelings, there's also a lot of talk of death in this episode. Aside from the plight of the veteran, Walter Huffnagel, the president is also dealing with the fallout of a hate crime inspired by the real-life murder of Matthew Shepard. And there's also Mrs. Lanningham, telling Charlie the story of her 2 sons, both of whom died in Vietnam. Mrs. Lanningham's story was not in Rick Cleveland's original script. Initially, the idea was to have the president also attend the Arlington funeral at the end, but Sorkin and Schlamy wisely saw that this would take away from the almost anonymous moment. Instead, it was decided that Mrs. Lanningham should ask to accompany Toby, and in that way, they could almost act as a surrogate mother and father at the soldier's graveside. But what would justify Mrs. Lanningham wanting to attend the funeral? Sorkin knew he had to write something to explain her wanting to go. So, as the cast and crew waited on set, Sorkin went off to write that scene. A few hours went by. The West Wing was notorious for its overdue productions. When Sorkin's pages finally made it down to the set, Director Graves went to take them, only to have them snatched first by John Spencer, who wasn't even in the scene. As Spencer read the monologue, he began to cry. Another actor took the pages and also began to cry upon reading it. By the time the pages got to Graves, he said he was almost afraid to take them. Reading the scene next, Catherine Jewston had an idea that during her delivery of the speech, Mrs. Lanningham should remain working at her computer. Dolores was a notorious hard worker, she reasoned, and she wouldn't allow personal time to take away from her job. Graves instantly agreed. And so one of the show's most powerful monologues was delivered almost brilliantly offhand, as a mother talks matter-of-factly about her bittersweet memories of Christmas Eve, 1970, and the death of her twin boys.
All new West Wing, 9/8 Central NBC next Wednesday.
In Excelsis Deo aired on December 15, 1999. To a Nielsen rating the show hadn't seen since the first few episodes. And today, the episode is a particular fan favorite, garnering a 9.1 on IMDb. At its time of broadcast, however, it kind of flew under the radar. It wasn't until award season in 2000 that the episode took on a mythical quality, perhaps for all the wrong reasons. At the 52nd Emmy Awards in 2000, the script for In Excelsis Deo was up for Best Writing for a Drama. With Aaron Sorkin and Rick Cleveland's names on the script, they shared the nomination. So here's a little trick to figure out who wrote what in Hollywood. If the writing credits contain an ampersand, it means the script was co-written equally by the credited writers, often working hand in hand. If the credit contains the word "and," it means usually that the 2 writers didn't work together, and it's likely one of those writers heavily rewrote the other's work. For this script, it might have been the biggest "and" in television that season. As I said, the story of the homeless alcoholic war veteran came from staffer Rick Cleveland's own life, and he went off to write, over the course of a month, the first 3 drafts of this script, then called Bellwether, named after the First Lady's cat. Sorkin had written nearly every episode of Sports Night and found it exhausting. So as the West Wing ramped up, he had every intention of letting go of the writing reins, telling the Baltimore Sun in August 1999, "While my plan is to write the majority of the scripts for both shows, we have terrific staffs in place. Before too long, those other writers are going to be doing much of the heavy lifting, so I can just polish a scene here and maybe elbow a line there." But as that heavy lifting commenced, he found he just couldn't let go.
My biggest nightmare, and I think it's possible the reason why I do keep writing every script, is that I'm terrified that somebody else is going to do it and do it a lot better than I will, and my parking space will be gone.
But Cleveland's draft, when performed at the table read by the cast, was not received well at all. In fact, Richard Schiff was so upset with the script and how Cleveland wrote Toby to be making out-of-character wisecracks, he went into a rage. "I was in a panic. It didn't make any sense," he told the TV Academy in 2010. Tommy Schlamme came to my trailer and said, "I hear you're upset," and I started crying. Schlamme assured Schiff that Aaron would fix the script, and Sorkin did, doing a page 1 rewrite, throwing out Cleveland's entire script, save for 2 or 3 minor details and, of course, Cleveland's personal story of the homeless vet.
And the Emmy goes to Rick Cleveland, Aaron Sorkin, The West Wing.
A year later, when the script won the Emmy for Best Writing, Sorkin and Cleveland took the stage for their thank yous. Cleveland, who had since moved on to 6 Feet Under, emailed Sorkin beforehand, saying he would like to say a brief word about his father should they win. But Sorkin alone took up all the allotted time and completely ignored Cleveland, who was mortified. In a piece Cleveland wrote for the Writers Guild magazine in November 2000, he called out Sorkin for hogging the limelight. He said he felt like Sorkin's security detail on stage, and the insult to injury came when the person backstage handing out the awards had no clue who he was. When the onstage snub resurfaced in a New York Times article in June of 2001, Sorkin took issue with what he thought was a non-issue. He went on the forums of the website Mighty Big TV to defend himself, writing that it was the Emmys rules that only one person could speak. Besides, he said, it was only out of the goodness of his heart that he even gifted Cleveland a co-writer credit. Then Sorkin's chat room post turned kind of nasty. He wrote, "At the end of the season, Rick was fired, not by me and for economic reason. It was by executive producer John Wells, and it was for lack of performance." Oof. Harsh words. "I was deeply hurt, deeply," Cleveland told TV Guide in August 2001. "Here's a guy with $15 million, and I'm a guy with $0 million." Sorkin's comments prompted Cleveland to rebut on the same Mighty Big TV forums, defending his draft of the script. "Aaron is a great writer," he wrote, "and he did a good job rewriting the script, but he didn't write it alone." He also pointed out that Sorkin hadn't gifted him the co-writer credit. The Writers Guild had to intervene, reviewing all the drafts of the script and determining that Cleveland should indeed be co-credited. A few days later, Sorkin returned to the forums and said he wanted to bury the hatchet. "I and everyone else appreciate the contribution you made to the episode. It was crucial," Sorkin wrote in a reply posting to Cleveland. "I was dead wrong to imply otherwise. I deeply regret not having thanked you that night. It was nothing more than nerves." And as for his public airing of the grievances, Sorkin was contrite, telling the Washington Post, "I reacted too quickly. I was simply responding to this person on the internet, not thinking that there were more than a dozen people in the room. I tried to talk about the situation. I then went a step too far." For his part, Rick Cleveland thanked Sorkin for his apology and moved on to work for some of peak television's greatest hits, including 6 Feet Under, Nurse Jackie, and Mad Men. But the feud wasn't over. Not really. In 2006, 5 years after this internet he said, Sorkin created a character on Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip that mirrored his relationship with Rick Cleveland. The character, played by Evan Handler, gets into a few heated exchanges with Sorkin's avatar on the series, head show writer Matt Albee, played by the late Matthew Perry, R.I.P. "We could write the greatest sketch in the world, but you wouldn't recognize it because it came from us," the character laments before he quits in episode 9. That character's name, well, obviously it's not Rick Cleveland, but Ricky Tahoe is pretty close. In Excelsis Deo would go on to earn a Humanitas Award nomination and a Writers Guild of America win for drama. Both of these honors were shared by Sorkin and Cleveland, and Sorkin even let Cleveland speak at the Writers Guild podium. But even today, this episode remains Aaron Sorkin's only Primetime Emmy Award win for writing, something he shares in common with Rick Cleveland. Thanks for watching Best Eps. Be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into television's most famous and infamous episodes.
I love
But
these
if you
people. It's
leave
my
when
home.
you're doing so much, what happens to this baby?
Oh, what happens is a real writer comes in and starts writing it. You can see what the show really can be.
And we'll give credit to him, won't we?
That's right.